Thank you so much for coming to my talk. There's some good ones on right now, so I feel grateful that you chose mine, and we'll catch the other ones on the YouTube later. I don't have a little clicker, so I'm going to be back and forth. My name's Simone Bennett. I'm a principal consultant at Brennan, and I'm from sunny Brisbane, so it's really nice to be here in your beautiful town of Melbourne. And I think I brought the sunshine with me because when I arrived it was like pouring rain and cold, and now it's delightful, so you're welcome. And this talk is May the Cloud Be With You, why landing zones matter, what they are and how to build one. The agenda is why landing zones matter, what they are and how to build one. So if that's not what you would like to learn about, please feel free to moonwalk out of here, but please don't, because I don't want it to be any more empty. Okay, so why do landing zones matter? So when you build a house, there's a bunch of stuff you have to consider. So you've got the slab, you've got the wiring, you've got the pitch of the roof, you've got, what kind of windows we're going to put in there, what shape of windows. And then you build the foundation of the house. So you've got the walls and everything built in, the electronics all in there. And then you make it your own. So then you might paint it or put curtains or furniture or whatever else you want to do. Like you make it yours once the foundation's there. But generally you don't change the foundation, so you might not change the plumbing or the wiring really, or the pitch of the roof or the windows, but you just change the stuff that's inside, because it's really hard to change that foundation later. And then if you have an architect built house, you have to consider every decision. So you have to consider where will the windows go, and what kind, are we going to have round windows or rectangles or squares, and what type of piping am I going to have, and what type of cabling will I have, and where will the driveway go, and all that kind of stuff. So there's lots and lots of options, and there's really high risk of making mistakes. For example, these guys obviously built their house and then went to put the door in at the last minute and was like, oh heck, So then you put these weird workarounds in, but changing the slab is very hard, whereas if you had done that before, you wouldn't have made the mistake. And a good example is these tiles. They're penny round tiles, and I just did my bathroom, and I thought, oh my God, they're so pretty, and I put them in my bathroom. But then the builder and the tiler and the plumber were all like, oh no, you shouldn't use those tiles because there's heaps of grout, and the grout gets really moldy and water seeps in through the grout, and blah, 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 blah. But I didn't know that because I've never done a bathroom before, so I just picked the tiles that I thought were cool. But if I had been a plumber or a builder or a tiler, I would have known that large tiles with a minimum amount of grout is what you should choose. But it's too late now because I've already chosen them and they're already on the wall, right? But if you build a house with someone like Metricon, and there's no relation there, I'm just the only person I could think of that does these, but they build those sort of standard houses and they just sort of stamp them out, and you can choose maybe like what air conditioner you get or what dishwasher you get, but essentially the window type, the plumbing, the electronics, the driveway, the garden, everything, it's all pre-configured. And that's because they know what works, they know how it clicks together, and they don't end up with any problems. So their doors always open and shut. You might choose the door, but they've got large tiles because they know that that's good, and they've got doors that open and shut properly. And it's the same when you go to the cloud. So the equivalent of Metricon house is like cloud adoption framework. So if you think about well-architected framework in Microsoft, I don't know if anyone's ever heard of that. Some people are nodding, which is excellent. That's about building a well-architected stack. So one application, making sure it's well-architected all the time. And then the cloud adoption framework is building that whole entire cloud environment right from beginning to end. So the journey from the beginning of the cloud where you plan it out and you do your strategy, right up to the end where you deploy your resources into cloud and you govern and manage them. And that's depicted in this diagram here. So if you think about defining strategy, that's doing those blueprints of the house. Planning, that's where you're figuring out where's it going to be and all the costings and stuff. Ready, and adopt is where you're building your cloud environment. And then iteratively you do govern and manage. So that just happens all the time, over and over again, and keeps your environment well architected. So I'm a consultant for years and years and years, and most people I work with, this is kind of what their cloud environment starts to look like. They just go, oh, I need a web app. And so they build a web app and they're like, oh, actually I can't access the web app. So then they're like, oh, I need a network, and then I need a network security group. Oh, okay. And then they go to create something else and it's like, no, you need a resource group for that. Oh, okay. So they create that as they go. And it just sort of builds organically. There's no sort of plan about it. So if you imagine, that's when you end up with this kind of thing, because I didn't have that kind of plan when I built the bathroom. I was just like, yeah, I like those tiles, and I built them, and then now I'm stuck with them. until I can afford to redo my bathroom again. And the downside to building your cloud environment like that is just that you end up with lots of technical debt, right? Like you end up with that door situation. It's hard to support. You might hit subscription limits. So there's limits in Azure and probably AWS as well, where you can only have so much of a resource per subscription. You might have accidental resource destruction. So we're all sharing one environment and I just decided to delete my stuff, but you're using it, right? So accidentally I delete your stuff. And there's no boundary between workloads. So oftentimes I see customers where they're like, I can't add something because I might damage, the other people in the team's stuff. And it just hamstrings their ability to do any work. Which leads me to the topic of this talk, landing zones. And if you look up landing zones on the internet, you'll get a diagram like this. And when I show that to customers, most people just nope out and be like, nah, I'm just going to go back to the one before that, right? Because that is a friggin' nightmare. But I'll break it down for you. So hopefully at the end of this talk, that doesn't give you nightmares anymore. So there's 8 key areas. We got billing with Microsoft Entra up the top there. So that's where you create the tenant. And that's where you have the billing identities. And you just create one of those. Usually the CTO or the CEO creates it. And forever, evermore you use it. You can't rename it. It is what it is. My voice is shaky because I've really rushed. I have to take a big breath. And then we've got identity and access management. So that's our identity. So it used to be called Active Directory, then Azure AD, and then 10 types of Azure AD, all the different types, and now it's called Entra. So essentially it's, all those things are Entra now. And then you might have the identity subscription here, and that's where if you've got on-premises networks or whatever, you might have domain controllers and all that kind of stuff in there. So the diagram's not like wrong, it's just very, very correct and complicated. So then you've got your management subscription, and that's called resource organization. And if anyone has worked with Active Directory in the past, you would know what OUs are, but if you're not from a infrastructure background, you think about management groups and resource organization just like folders. So you're putting all your resources into folder structures where you can apply governance to them based on where they sit in the hierarchy. Then we've got network connectivity and topologies where you have a hub network and it's peered to everything else. So you might have a central firewall, central hub network, central DNS. That might be where your application gateways sit, all that kind of stuff that you share. So shared infrastructure for the network that sits at the middle of the environment. You have a security and management subscription, which is exactly what it says in the box, right? Security and management. So it's all your tagging, it's all your compliance, it's all your security, logging, monitoring, all that kind of stuff. And it has all the governance and guardrails and stuff in there. And then you have platform automation and DevOps, so exactly what it says in the box as well. And then they have, to make it even more cluttered, they have the concept of platform landing zones and application landing zones. So platform landing zones is that all that stuff that's shared. So the network, identity, connectivity management, governance, that's all your platform. And if you think about that as the foundation of your house. And then you have application landing zones. So that's all the things that you put inside, like your web app or whatever. You build a little subscription boundary, and then you give the team access to it, and they build the application in it. So the two differences there. And in the diagram from Microsoft, they represent it like this. So management, identity, connectivity is your platform landing zone. So they're essentially subscriptions with those shared resources inside. Someone's trying to take a photo, so I'll just wait a sec. And then we have application landing zones, and they are they've represented them in their diagram with like a proper app stack inside, which is why it looks so complicated. But if you think about, they've got a web app and I think a database and stuff in there. But I like to joke that it's just too much. Okay, like it's very correct, but it's just too hard. If you show this to customers or your teams, they just say no. So let's make it simpler. This is how I visualize, and this is how I put them in my designs. So you have GitHub or your CI/CD pipeline of choice, but I'm Team GitHub. And that's where we have all of our infrastructure as code, because infrastructure as code is like documented, people can change it, change control, it's excellent. You have that identity and billing up the top there, and a root management group, which is what you'd have if you built your cloud organically as well. Then you have those management groups that we talked about for the resource organization. Then you have governance, so you have service health alerts, policy, advisor, all that kind of stuff, naming, tagging, cost alerts. And then you have those 4 subscriptions that form the platform. So you've got the self-hosted runners, maybe, managed identities, state files. You might have your DNS firewall, like Bastion, all those shared networking, domain controllers if you're doing on-premises and you're connecting it in. And then you might have, centralized platform logging, alerting, cost management, update management, all that stuff in the management subscription. And that's the cloud adoption framework aligned way of doing it, where it's all separate subscriptions. But if you are not a large company, like you're a real estate or a startup or, I don't know, a lot of Australian companies fall into the small to medium enterprise size, and you're never going to be big. Like, say, I don't know, Virgin might want to be big, but they might not necessarily need more resources. They just want to make more money. So they have the same amount of people, but they just want to have better profits. They might not ever grow larger. Virgin's probably a bad example, but I just couldn't think of a better one. So in that case, if you're not going to grow, and that's definitely the case, I like to put them all into one subscription and separate them into resource groups. There's a bit of discourse about whether that's okay or not in the Microsoft teams. They used to have this as the start small and expand model. They're actually asking for feedback for that now in the repo, which I'll show you at the end if you want to add your 2 cents. But I like to generally, if the company's not big and they're not going to grow gigantic, do it like this. But if there's a chance they might grow, moving this stuff around later is super hard and annoying. So think about that early as part of that plan phase. And then we have those application landing zones. So that's where we stamp out subscriptions, like a boundary of control, and then we put in everything that the dev team or the application team might need to get started. So we might have a storage account, Terraform state file ready to go, manage identities, logging, alerting, cost management, all that kind of stuff. We stamp that out using subscription vending, which I'll talk about later. And then we have our sandbox subscriptions. They're pretty much the same as those application landing zones, but they might be the dev test workloads. Is anyone using those for Microsoft Dev Test or MSDN? Okay, well if you're not using them, you should, because Dev Test is super cheap, has no SLAs, so don't use it for production stuff, but it's much cheaper than production or pay-as-you-go. And the same is the MSDN. If you have a agreement with Microsoft, you'll have so many Visual Studio Code licenses or whatever, and you get MSDN subscriptions that you can allocate to your team. And you get like, I think $200 a month credit, which you'll blow through if you're doing AI, but if you're doing infrastructure and stuff, you can manage with it. So we have them in a sandbox management group so that we can apply less restrictive policy and guardrails to them, but let people experiment outside of the real world. And when I talked about subscription vending, that's where we're stamping those out. So when I do subscription vending for customers, I build their platform landing zones as a repo, and then I have another repo, subscription vending, which is, I'll show you in a minute how to do. And it creates a subscription programmatically, creates a managed identity, creates storage, creates monitoring alerts, creates cost alerts, creates tagging rules, all that kind of stuff. Then you give it to the team, and they can just put their stuff inside. But all that sort of guardrails and infrastructure stuff they don't care about is pre-created for them. And this is a journey that Microsoft has on their Docker. So you create a platform, you create subscription vending, and then you deploy your workloads in. And they have a bunch of accelerators. So if you're trying to do AVD or SAP and stuff like that, they have accelerators that are like pre-canned code that you can just pump into that application. Some people I've worked with think that should be a monolith repo. I don't know why, but I'm just super anti-monolith. So I have that as 3 repos, but I'm also not willing to die on the hill. So if you love monoliths, that's totally fine. But I think it's good to have the teams own their own repo and not have permissions that are too, I don't want the person who's deploying their web app having access to the core network code, anyway. We can argue about it later if you're super passionate. Okay, so a quick recap, because I'm cognizant it's an hour talk, so I put a bunch of recaps in there. Also, those chairs are super uncomfy, so when we do the recaps, feel free to just have a little stretch if you need, stand up. But we have landing zones, pre-configured cloud environments, and they set that baseline for networking, security, and identity, and they're structured starting points. So it's the foundation for your cloud environment. And then we use subscriptions or application landing zones to hold your application environments, and we love them, and we want to build one. But before we move on, is there any questions about what is a landing zone or what they look like? And if you're shy, you can just half put your hand up and I'll come down and talk to you and then come back and repeat your question. No? Or if you want to holler out at me throughout the talk, I also don't particularly mind. No? Okay, cool. So when I talk to customers or friends and colleagues, and I tell them about landing zones, most of the devs are like, still too hard. I don't even know where to start with that. I have what I need. So I'm going to show you how you can get started. So the options for building landing zones are organically without a plan, like the first one, yuck. Using custom infrastructure as code. I've definitely talked to some people who are like, no, I'm writing it from scratch because I can do it better than the Microsoft teams or the AWS teams. Again, I'm a bit like, yuck. And then you can use Azure verified modules, which we're going to look at today, or you can use the Terraform and Bicep accelerator. Has anybody used verified modules or the Bicep accelerator? Oh, yay. Well, I'm not going to blow your minds, but everybody else, I'm going to blow your minds. Okay, yeah, so organically without a plan, we're like, welcome to ClickUps, baby. And that's when you end up with these. I don't care what you say, it's just not the right way to do it. I know that it seems easier to do stuff in the portal, but eventually it gets hard. You can't repeat it. Nobody else in your team can see what you've done. You've got no change control. There's no deployment gates. If you need to redeploy it, you can't easily. It's not documented because there's no code, or I'm guessing if you're ClickOpsing it, you're also not writing documentation because you wouldn't have time. So there's a bunch of reasons why infrastructure as code is the best way to do it. The next one is writing custom infrastructure as code. Again, I'm like, yuck. I don't know if everybody saw this. It doesn't quite fit, but it was like the most funniest thing I saw in ages. But he like vibe coded his app. And I think people who build their landing zone from scratch are kind of like vibe coding their landing zone as well, just building what they need as they go with no plan in mind. And then bad things happen later because you don't know what you don't know, right? Like you don't know that the door's not going to open. You don't know that those tiles are no good. That's how you end up with that kind of world. There are some weird people on the internet. We all know that. Okay, so the first option that I really like is using Azure verified modules. This is Azure verified modules. So there's two concepts. There's verified modules, which are a thing, like our Key Vault or our storage. And each of the verified modules is owned by someone in the product team at Microsoft. So they're supposed to keep the code best practices and opinionated and make sure the code doesn't rot. Because we all know as soon as you build something, it starts to rot and then it doesn't work when you go to use it. I don't know if anyone ever tried to use Carmel, the CARML modules. It was the first iteration of this, but it's fully owned by the public and no one sort of owned it and kept it up to date. So this is now, for a verified module to exist, someone in the team at Microsoft has to own it and keep it best practices aligned. And the one that we care about is the pattern module. So pattern modules where they take those verified modules, they wire them all together and they make a pattern. So there's like one for Kubernetes, one for SAP. And the one I care about, because I do landing zones, is the Azure verified modules pattern Azure landing zone, ALZ. And there's also one for subscription vending. They're free to use, they're open source, so if you find something that you don't like, you can just make a PR and the teams will review and accept it, or you can log issues on the repo, so it's really interactive and easy to keep them up to date, but they're opinionated and best practices aligned. If you're going to use the pattern modules, there's some prerequisites in GitHub that you need to create. So you need to create things like branch policies, a repo, you need to create all the actions, you need to create your environments for plan and apply, and you need to create CI/CD tokens or PAT tokens or OIDC authentication, all this kind of stuff. Maybe you have self-hosted runners depending on your security. And then in Azure, you need to set up some prerequisites as well. So you'd have a resource group with if you're team Terraform like me, with your state file. And then you need to have the storage account for the state file to go into. And all that kind of stuff needs to be set up as prerequisites for your landing zone. Oh, I had a little button. Anyway. They're really good. The verified modules are really good. This is how I build landing zones for my customers because I want them to be flexible. I don't necessarily want them to be complex, but they're flexible, and I can customize them based on the industry. So if I'm working for a bank or like an energy provider, they've got an OT network, they've got a normal network, traffic must never cross. It doesn't fall into like a standard pattern, so I can be a lot more flexible with what we're building. It's infrastructure as code though, so it's repeatable, it's declarative, it's documented, it's change controlled, there's deployment gates, and if you're building landing zones for customers regularly, it could be good. So you've sort of got a pattern there that you've built, and I just toggle off or on things like, do they need a firewall, true or false? Do they need a app config, true or false? But if you're not doing it every day, or you don't need a complex environment, the landing zone verified modules docker, which is very thorough, also might be just like terrifying still, like the diagram. So the next option you have is to use the accelerator. So the Microsoft Patterns and Practices team for Cloud Adoption Framework has a catchy name, and they have built this Landing Zone Accelerator, which is really cool. And what it does is it creates those, it gives you steps to do your planning, so it asks you a bunch of questions. Then it does your prerequisites for you. So you know that stuff I had on the slide where you set up GitHub and the stuff where you set up Azure, it does it for you with a PowerShell script. And then it goes ahead and puts your code customized into a repo for you, creates CI/CD pipelines, and then you just click go and it deploys the environment for you. So it's pretty cool. This is the document sort of where it asks you the questions. So these are the decisions that you need to make. What language are you going to use? Terraform, obviously. I don't really care, but I'm Team Terraform. What regions will you need? What type of management group names would you like? You know, at that first layer there. What type of network do you want? Like, do you want to use Azure? Do you want to use a hub and spoke, or do you need it to be separate? You know, for regulatory compliance, things like that. So you go through, then you click the scenarios, and if you don't quite know how you want it to look, they've even made basic scenarios for you. So for example, you want a multi-region hub and spoke with a firewall? Cool. We've got a TF-vars file, which is all the variables filled out for you, ready to go. And you just put that into your code, and it's pre-configured. Network, topology, everything already configured for you. So all the best practices from a large team of Microsoft who does the customer deployments, all distilled down into those scenarios for you to pre-use. Why is that cool? Well, you can just use that predefined template to deploy your landing zone and infrastructure, knowing that there's best practices baked into it, right? And you don't need to take those verified modules and wire them together. They become wired together. So the little bits and pieces where you're like, here's some really good Lego, but how do I build the thing? They've done that for you. And even things like the Terraform state file they create has backups and is protected so that your secrets, you can't get deleted. Things like that that you might not think to do when you're doing it yourself. Yeah, and it's got opinionated best practices baked in, and it's both Bicep and Terraform. So if you're really into one or the other, there's both options. If you don't use the predefined vars file, you can also use a PowerShell script where it asks you the questions. So I'm saying complete because I want like a hub and spoke network and everything in there. And I'm saying I want it to be in Australia East, but then I can't spell, but there we go. And then I'm using the same subscription for all three, connectivity, identity, and management, because I've got one MSDN subscription. So I'm putting the same one in there for them. And then it goes ahead and installs all the stuff on my local machine that it needs without me having to do anything, which is always a pain when you're trying to use a new module or something, having to figure out what you need. It installs all that, and then it will create a plan file. And if you use Terraform, there's like everything it's going to create gives you a little green plus sign, and it says everything I'm going to create. So you can see here, it's going to create a GitHub repo, it's going to create a managed identity, it's going to create CI/CD pipelines, it's going to create everything it needs to set up, it's going to create the repository, connect it to Azure, put all the prerequisites in Azure, put the code customized into your GitHub repo, set up the pipelines, ready to go. And then, so that looks like this. So when you go into GitHub, you've got a repo now. It's got a variables file that's all pre-populated, or you can use the one from the scenarios. It's got the, where am I up to? Sorry, I just lost track of time. Yeah, so this is the code where it's going to create the network, hub network, virtual network gateway, everything in there, all created like really well-written Terraform that follows best practices. And then in Azure, you've got a storage account, you've got managed identities created. They're wired into GitHub already, so they have permission. GitHub has permission to use those managed identities to deploy resources for plan and apply. The plan one has no permission to deploy anything, and the apply one does. So when you run the different pipelines, they have best practices, which is like minimum permissions. And then you go into the storage containers, and there's the TF state files in there as well. And that file is like protected with backups and all that kind of stuff, which is awesome. A bunch of knowledge in there that you just might not have, you know, like the door and the tiles. So the accelerator is best for teams who don't do infrastructure every day. Anyone who isn't sure how to wire those modules together. Teams that need a structured and predefined cloud foundation, or greenfield and brownfield environments. I was talking to someone at work and they said, oh, but that's only good for greenfield, right? And I was like, no, not really, but we'll get into that later. So to recap, You can deploy your landing zone organically without a plan, yuck. You can use custom infrastructure as code, which I generally wouldn't recommend, but I guess you do you, boo, if that's really your jam. You can use Azure verified modules, which is a really good starter and accelerator, or you can use the accelerator, which is super easy, best practice is baked in, and a good place to start. So, there's more recap. Well, I was gonna have a drink. Sorry. Oh yeah, so the accelerator, I just want to be clear. It deploys your automation, it deploys your resource organization, so the management groups, it deploys your connectivity, identity, and management resources. It deploys your governance layer, but it does not deploy the application landing zones. So they are done by subscription vending or manually or however you want to deploy them. But the accelerator deploys the platform for you, not the application stack. Cool. Is there any questions on that? Mm-hmm. Actually, I have a slide at the end. I can skip to, otherwise if you don't mind. Yeah? Yeah. But it is fine for both. Actually, yeah, I will skip to, I'll wait till I get to it because I've got a nice picture and everything. Is there any other questions on the accelerator, or does anyone argue with me about like ClickOpsing being the best? Everyone's so, I wish I was before lunch because after lunch everyone's like complacent and tired. Okay, so then the next step in your landing zone deployment is making it production ready. So you've got a foundation, it's wired up, the power's connected, you're ready to go, but there's a bunch of stuff that needs to happen to be production ready. And in Microsoft style, they've got a very extensive document that you can go through with links saying these are all the things you should check off to make your environment production ready. I just want to call out a few things that I do to get you started. Tagging. Most customers I work with are not great at tagging, and there's two reasons. One, people don't really care about tags when they're deploying their applications, their resources, which means it's really hard to do cost management, it's really hard to know who deploys it or owns it, and you end up with the sprawl that you had on-prem or in any other environment. But the other reason is there's more than 2,000 resources in Azure, but only 600 or so can be like directly tagged. So there is a policy out that allows you to inherit tags from the subscription level or from the resource group level. I would always suggest enforcing tags at the subscription level, so you can't create a subscription without tags, but not enforcing tags at the resource group level, because there's some resources like, I think it's container apps or something that just wants to make its own tags and it won't deploy and it breaks everything. So I put those on inherit and then I enforce it at the subscription level. And at the resource group, I say, if there's not a tag, inherit them from the subscription. And if there is a tag, just leave it as is. So then everybody's happy. Yeah?
What about for your Sandpit subscription?
Yeah, I just apply tags to that too, like Sandpit and stuff like that. So when I'm doing cost reporting, I can say, the thing is, if you enforce tags at the subscription, you're not creating subscriptions 10 times a day. You create one and you give it to someone. So they have to have tags. But then if you just inherit tags, anything that just gets put in there, you don't stop them deploying, but it just inherits the tags from the subscription. So you at least have some idea of what it is when you do those big cost reports, like a big Excel spreadsheet. Have you had problems with tags in Sandpit?
No, I'm just wondering if you're not enforcing it at the resource group level, then because two different people are spinning up resource groups in the Sandpit with different names.
Yeah.
So if you want to tag it to the person who spun this Sandpit,
Yeah, I mean, I did used to deploy them at the resource group, but there's a bunch of resources in Azure that the order of creation is like, the resource group must have a tag, but it creates the thing how it wants to create it, so then it can't create because there's no tag, and it's just like this cycle of developers getting really angry. So then this turned out to be like a happy medium in the middle, where at least you get a Sandpit tag, and you can have a audit to say, hey, you didn't tag it, or you could have policies, but yeah, enforcing it means you literally can't deploy without the tag, and then people try to get around it by not using the Sandpit. They'll just put it in their own MSDN or something, which, like, shadow IT exists because of security, right, where you have to try and find the middle ground. Oh my gosh, my battery's low, that's my worst nightmare. Oh my gosh. Okay, so while I go through this policy, so this is a policy to inherit tags from the from the resource group. So there's a website called AZ Advertiser, I live in it, but it's every single policy in Azure that's like built into Azure. I don't know if the sound guy could maybe please help me plug this in if you don't mind. I'm usually so organized, sorry. Yeah, and so you can use this policy to apply tags to everything. This is the one that I set as deploy if not exists, but not enforce. So if there's no tags, thank you so much, I'm so sorry. If there's no tags, it will go ahead and inherit them down. And the subscription one I set to enforce. And so we apply that policy here at the root management group. Generally the advice is don't apply policy at root management group because then you always got to add exceptions. But for tagging, like you want everything to have a tag, right? Because you want to know who owns it and who to charge it to, or why does it cost $60,000, who do I go talk to? So I apply that there, but I would say at the lower levels, every resource gets a tag, but it's only enforced at the subscription level. And then for cost management, there's also a policy called deploy a budget. So again, I use this policy. So every time you build a new subscription, it automatically gets a budget and a cost alert assigned to it. And the tip I would have is that the owner of the subscription should be the person who gets your budget and cost alerts, and your service health alerts for that matter. Because so many times I've worked with companies where they didn't know why their stuff had turned off or crashed or been deprecated, but all these alerts have been going to the CTO or the CFO, the person who just does not know what that means and they don't care. So the person who owns a subscription should get the alerts about this subscription and be able to action them. Also, if your team doesn't know how much your stuff is costing and they can't see the budget alerts, like they're just going to use the most expensive stuff and not understand why that's a problem and have to go back and rework it later. So again, I apply that policy at the secondary management group. So I might say everyone in the SAP management group gets a $5,000 subscription, or probably more. But everyone in the sandbox management group gets a $200 budget, and they get alerts when it's 50, 100, 90%. And then, so you can configure that whatever level you like. I think even down to the resource group, but I find with policy, it's easy to apply it to that the application level management group there, and just have sort of like a high level budget for that stack. And that's, saying like each resource group that gets created will have those applied automatically. And then to complement that, when I make my subscriptions as subscription vending, I create an action group in every subscription. And then as part of the vending, I ask the users what's the email address for the alerts. I usually ask for a group, and I wire that all in. But then users can always go into the action group and just add their email to the action group, and they'll get all those alerts by default. So they can subscribe to alerts about their subscription if they like. If you want to set up alerts for your stuff, but you don't know everything about every one of the 2,600 resources in Azure, like me, there's a really cool repo called the Azure Monitor Baseline Alerts. Is anyone using that? It's cool. So again, product teams at Microsoft own it. Each product team, like the storage team, creates alerts for things they think you should care about storage. So you deploy this, you can use PowerShell. I think they've updated it very recently to be redeployable as part of your pipeline, but you can do a one-time deploy. It creates a bunch of policy initiatives at the root. So every time you create a new storage account, it automatically gets all the alerts about the storage account. So for example, you'll get alerts if someone makes it public to the internet. You'll get alerts if somebody deletes it or deletes the backups or turns off whatever security you have set on there. Same for Key Vault. If I turn off the backups on Key Vault or make it public, it would send alerts automatically. And if I create a new Key Vault without whatever setting it should have, it will alert me straight away. So you don't have to know everything about every resource. You can just set this policy at the root, delete anything that you really don't care about, but I would suggest it's all good to know. And then it will create policies, and every time a resource is created, alerts will be created for it automatically. The same goes for security. There's policy again that you can apply at the root, baseline alerts. It's free. And it gives you your security posture. I set this to not alert me. I just have it sort of as a dashboard because it's very thorough. But it depends on your industry. If you're a bank, probably you want to know about it. But I also think you shouldn't have alerts if you're not going to action them, because then you just ignore all the alerts, right? So I have this as audit, and then I usually make use of the security score that it gives you, and maybe show that as part of a dashboard. So lots of people I work with, you might create a dashboard with Power BI that pulls in all their advisor scores and security scores and things like that, and budgets into one place, so the subscription owners can see what's their status. Or you can set up alerts just for security score or security posture if you like. But the baseline alerts are free. You just toggle them on with the policy and then you get them. And the security score is really good because it gives you a nice graph and everybody likes to put them in their reports. So this is where I would apply the baseline security group at the root. Again, I want everything to be secure by default. And I wouldn't not have security at the sandbox level because there's been lots of instances where that's the subscription that gets hacked over Thanksgiving Day weekend or something. Customers been up $2,000 or $3,000 worth of. Actually, when I was at Microsoft, we had one customer with $1 million bill that they had to pay because they used it, but it was somebody hacked it and did crypto mining for like a week while everybody was on skeleton stuff for Thanksgiving and Christmas. So it's really good to have security on your sandbox because it's usually the environment that you let people go a bit wild in. So it's a great target to hack. It's usually got bits of real data. It's usually got copies of databases. So it's good to still have alerts there, just maybe don't be blocking people from doing anything in there, but still have guardrails and still know what people are doing. So when we put those together, we've got like platform logs in the management. So I have a policy that says everything in the platform, so all that stuff there, sends all its logs to a log analytics workspace. And then for each subscription that we create, the app team can create a log analytics workspace for their logs, for their app logs. That's because they might not have access to these ones here. But as an admin, you can search across all log analytics and get like a unified result anyway. The only downside to having many is you don't get consumption-based discounts. If you have 500,000 log analytics, you don't get any discounts. But so I generally have one for all platform logs and then one for each application subscription, or so that the teams can write and read and delete whatever they want out of there without affecting my security logs. And then I have action groups per subscription so people can subscribe and know what's happening in their environment. So to recap, we have subscriptions that give teams a boundary of control so they have some freedom to do what they need, but there's guardrails that filter down from the top. We have policy, we have robust monitoring, security, benchmarks, and governance at that governance layer that applies to everything. We have resources organized and policy and auto remediation at that management group level, both of them. And then we have subscriptions, RBAC groups down the bottom here to set alerts. So what I do is create an RBAC group for each subscription that's like owner reader. So then the teams who own the subscription can add people into that group freely and only just sort of manage access to that subscription. And then we might apply less restrictive policy at the sandbox level, but we still apply policy because we still want to have guardrails, we still want to know what's going on, and we still want to be secure. We might apply Azure Monitor baseline alerts, which was too long, at the root there. So you have alerts for all of your resources auto-created. And then we have role-based access control, obviously, at the identity layer. And then everything is version controlled. Everything has a deployment gate. Everything is written as, documented as infrastructure as code at the automation layer. And that's where the platform logging story is. Okay, questions on that? Anyone? Is everybody surviving? The chairs? My friend said, I was telling him it's a really long talk and it's a super dry topic and I always feel guilty giving it. And he said, you should take a bucket of KFC and just give everyone a KFC. And I was like, what? And then I was like, I would be sitting there with the bones being like, the whole talk, just like, what do I do this? He's like, no, just walk around like a church and be like, give me your bones. I was like, anyway, I did think about it because it's a dry topic, but you're doing well to stay focused. Thank you.
One question.
Yep.
So we run multiple copies of our deployment in multiple geos.
Yep.
How would you get, so we've got one of these applications, a website, how would you get that running in 4 geos with this model? Is that, what level would we duplicate? Would we duplicate all of this or have the root there and it duplicated further down, or would that be a platform concern or an application landing zone concern?
So normally I deploy this whole stack for the platform, maybe just forget the application subscriptions because you can put them wherever you want. But I deploy this whole C-shaped stack in my primary region. So there's one copy of the management identity connectivity. And then in the subsequent regions, I would deploy a connectivity and a management subscription, and that is just because logging and alerting, like log analytics going across regions really like latency, like high latency, and it can be expensive as well for the traffic. So it depends on what you have. Like if you just got one web app, I would just deploy a hub. I would just deploy like a connectivity in the other region. But if you've got a lot of stuff happening in both, like say it's a duplicate of hot environment, I would deploy the connectivity and the management. And then you have like, at that platform level, I usually have like platform Australia Southeast, platform blah, 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 like underneath, like another little tree here for each region. And with the verified modules or the accelerator, you can choose how many regions and what you want in each one. And if you want a hub and spoke network, or other network options are there as well. But I put like a full connectivity, like you probably want to, if you've got express route, you're going to want that per region. If you've got a firewall, you probably want that per region. So yeah, I duplicate most of this per region. But if it's a customer that's like, oh, we just need the website to be available there, there's simpler options. Like I might just deploy a landing zone for the app and put that there. But if you need your whole environment replicated, yeah, that's what I would do. So far away. Okay, there's this quote that I've used in a few talks because I really like it because it confirms the narrative of my talk, and that's from Kelly Shordridge, and she says, our common enemy across dev teams, across infrastructure, is unintended behaviour. We want to build standardised patterns, we want to build standard solutions to cross-cutting concerns. So we want those paved paths and patterns, and it's been kind of like, I don't know, back in the zeitgeist the last few years, the whole platform engineering becoming a thing again. And in my opinion, to build paved paths and standardized patterns, you need to do infrastructure as code, which, hands up if you're not convinced on infrastructure as code, like how hard do I got to go on this? No one, okay. All right, so they're the tools that you could use, or there's probably others, but one of the devs I used to work with was just Pulumi crazy, so whatever, if you want to use Pulumi, I put that in there so I would stop complaining when I let him read my talk. And then you can use options like Azure Verified Modules, which we looked at earlier, or there's Azure Development Environments and Azure Development Templates. And honestly, they're for developers. What they do is they give you like that pattern module pre-canned, and you run it from your local machine and it deploys a bunch of resources for you. I don't love it for anything real because it doesn't put any code in a repo, nobody else can see what you've done, there's no change control, there's no deployment gates, nothing, right? It just creates the thing for you, which is great if you're just like, I need to spin up something so I can test it out, but it's not great for like, I need to spin up this thing so everyone can use it and my team can work on it with me, and when I'm away, somebody can make a PR and fix it. So in my opinion, those two are similar to ClickOpsing it, but faster and quicker for spinning up a dev environment. And here we are to the gentleman of the brownfield. So yeah, sometimes I hear people going, it's just not viable because I have brownfield. I've already got resources in the cloud, and then I'm going to stamp this out. How would that work? Oh, I thought I took this out. But anyway, one thing you can do is set a baseline with this gigantic checklist. But it's actually really popular when I tell people about it. It's what the CSU team at Microsoft use to audit your environment when you come on and they do a new project. It's everything you should have right in your landing zone. So if you need to set a baseline on where you're at, it's like the well-architected framework reviews. You can go through this. You know, it's onerous, it's a whole team event. I would suggest getting some sugar and stuff and just getting through it. But it is a really good place to get started if you need a baseline or you need to justify the work to your management teams. Then I would deploy a new platform landing zone, and I've obviously got the application ones in there. So yep, I would deploy the whole platform that we just talked about and the application landing zones. I would create the landing zone code, I would create subscription vending code, get it all lovely. Then I would take my legacy resources, which are here. Look how gross they look compared to the nice ones. And then I would move them over underneath the management groups that are in existence. So if I take those application subscriptions that are as they are, I don't need to migrate resources or anything for now. But all that policy that we applied at the top there is going to filter down and retrofit settings and alerting and guardrails and cost management to those resources that exist. But it still might be ClickOpsed in, it's still not great. There's some tools you can use to make your life better there. So I don't know if anyone's ever had to like take a customer's environment and write part of it back as Terraform or another language, but it's a pain. It's like awful. So people are crying. Yep. So there's two tools that exist. I haven't used AZ Ops, but my Bicep friends really like it. And Terraform, it used to be called AZ Terrify when it first came out. which was better because I could make jokes about it. But now it's called AZTF Export, which is very professional. But what I do love is that just recently, it's been released into the portal in Azure. And you can enable this preview if you like. If you can't figure out how, feel free to hit me up on LinkedIn or whatever. I'll send you the link. I'm choosing a storage account here, but you can choose a resource group. And you can go to the automation tab. You can say export template. You could always say ARM or Bicep, right? But now you can choose Terraform, Azure RM, or Azure AZ API. On a side note, AZ API is pretty much the future, I think. So if it was me, I would always choose AZ API so you don't have to rewrite your code later. Like everything new is in AZ API. It's like the DevOps/GitHub thing that's happening. But you can see it creates a full Terraform. This is written in conjunction with the Terraform team. So it's like proper Terraform that's written to best practices. It gives you everything about that. And obviously, then you can just copy it, take it over to VS Code or your IDE of choice. I've been testing out Windsurf lately. But it gives you there. And then what I would do is take that. If it's a resource group, that's going to be long, and then just break it out into modules. But like that speeds up your getting your ClickOps environment to code dramatically. And then you can just run a few plans. Maybe you have to correct one or two things, but essentially it becomes code. And now your environment's got the guardrails that you wanted before. It's got the infrastructure as code. And then the last step is to just decommission the stuff that's duplicated. So, you might have an old hub network or whatever that you just need to decommission for cost saving, and you have a nice, tidy environment. So to recap, I also forgot to set a timer. I suck today. It's such a long day. Convert legacy resources to code where you can. Migrate the resources into the new landing zone, and then filter down that policy and guardrails. And if you have subscription vending, what I tend to do is take the subscription ID for those ones I've moved in, point subscription vending to it, and it retrofits all those alerts and action groups and storage account and managed identities that I have. So it just retrofits them, but without wiping out what's in there. So then suddenly I have a subscription with all the stuff I want it to have in there as well. Decommission old resources, and obviously then we just profit. Cool. If you are sold and you love landing zones now and you love Cloud Adoption Framework, this is a great place to go. So the reason I know what's new, the reason I know what the new tools are and stuff is because I joined the community calls with the Cloud Adoption Framework team from Microsoft. If you go to their repo, they have the calls, all the recordings are there. You can log issues on their issues board. You can see their roadmap, so you're not trying to build something that they're actually building already, which I find very helpful. You can vote on the roadmap items. You can argue with the team like I do about that whole subscription versus 1 versus 4 thing. If you go on there, please, I'm petty, so vote for my arguments so that they keep the 1 subscription option. But it's a really good place to go and stay up to date and communicate with the team and get your voices heard. At the moment, they're asking for feedback about AZ API versus Azure RM if you care and you want to go and make your voice heard. And that's me. So if you want these slides, I know I just bombarded you with information. So if you want these slides, feel free to contact me on either of these. I also have a talk I did similar, but I feel like it was a lot more fun because, well, architected, there's lots more sad stories you can laugh about. It's on there as well. I've recorded if you'd like to catch it. And you can catch me on Blue Sky, which is like new Twitter. I don't know if, I'm shocked that people aren't on there, but it's great. And pretty please give me a green card. Or 2, because I would love to come back again at some point. And thank you so much to our sponsors, and thanks for coming. Is there any more questions or thoughts?
On the brownfield stuff, what if you already got stuff like front door and other things that are already really hard to move?
Yeah. The reason, front door is hard to move, and that's why you don't want to build your environment. Like, it's hard to move that stuff. So if you get it right to start with, you don't have to deal with this later when you're like, oh, actually this doesn't work well, and I can't do anything in front door because I'm going to break everybody else's stuff. So yeah, there's not an easy solution to move it around. If you've got front door, there's a few other resources that just don't cope with being migrated between subscriptions, which is why I tried to just move the subscription. The front door, I guess you could just point to the new network and stuff, so it could just be manually changing a few settings, but you'd have to go into the code and make sure it sort of matched so you don't blast your... Front door has like the registering the fully qualified domain names that like never works in code, so like I've never got that to work. But or you have to keep running it for it to work, I'm not sure. But yeah, I don't have a good answer, which is why I think you should build it well to start with to just avoid that pain later. And if you've got a brownfield environment now, like consider making it nice now, because eventually that tech debt's going to catch up with you, right? Like you're going to have to fix it. Sorry, I don't have a nice answer for that one. Yeah, you can just cry about it. Yeah, that's okay. It's okay to have feelings. Yeah. Any other questions? Well, thanks for surviving. I know it's a really dry topic in the afternoon after lunch, so thank you.